Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming tonight for our Flash event. We are going to do it as a founder story with questions, and as Estonians are relatively shy in asking questions openly, I collected a bunch of them beforehand, so and categorized them so we can go through different categories later on. But at some point, you can also raise your hand and ask a question from Kartik by yourself. But I'm not like, what fascinated about your background to me was that you are 3 times a startup founder. You have tried to set up a Formula 1 racing team and unsuccessfully, and you're not afraid to admit it that such a crazy idea didn't succeed. Sure. And that you, from your based on your latest startup has become one of the biggest in India in real estate handling, and on top of that, you have joined Techstars, where you have been seeing like hundreds of startups yearly. So very fascinating background. So glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And let's have a big applause to Kartik.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's have a seat.
While we're sitting down, I'd like to thank our host, Kalev. He's been very helpful in not only organizing this event, but making sure nobody sits on the first table over there. He told me about the Estonian shyness. So for those of you who are not shy, or if we're not speaking loudly enough, feel free to come in over here. I know I don't bite, but he did tell me that he bites, so you'll be safe. But thank you genuinely for hosting us. Thank you to Superangels and to Kaidi at Fundabeam for introducing us at Techstars to you. We're delighted to be here and hope that we can make a regular feature out of visiting Tallinn to meet with the excellent crop of entrepreneurs that we have over here. So delighted to be here. And
great to have you here. So what's your founder story? How did you start your first startup, and
Sure.
what makes you ticking? Why haven't you stopped?
I guess I felt like an entrepreneur even through while I was growing up. I grew up in New Delhi in India, and just by way of size, so the population of Estonia is what, 1.5 million? New Delhi's population is about 11.5 million. So it's a very large city, it's a very large country, and it's just very chaotic, and there's lots of opportunity everywhere. It's still a very poor country, even though it's progressed a lot. But anywhere you saw, there was lots of opportunity for you to be engaged in and to be involved in. And so even as a child, I'd think about different business ideas or different entrepreneurial ventures that one could participate in. Most of them were very foolish, and most of them were just, kids' ideas when you're 12 years old or 13 years old or in your teens and in college trying to figure out what you're going to do. And but some of them, some of those learnings come back to you, because what you pick up as a child, just seeing human behavior, can become very applicable much later in life when you can draw upon all the data that you've collected over the course of many years of engaging with people and in the markets as well.
Can you give me an example? What did you learn as a kid in New Delhi, and what you could apply later?
So for instance, it's a poor country, and when I was growing up, it was even much poorer. Delhi is not poor, but the country is generally quite poor. And when we travel on holidays in the summertime with my parents, you'd see people brushing their teeth with the twig of a leaf. It's a plant called a tree called neem. It's a natural cleansing tree. It's used a lot in Ayurveda as well. But my thought was, well, why can't people buy something as simple or cheap. In my naivety as a 10-year-old kid, I thought, oh, everybody should be able to afford a toothbrush at least, and everybody should be able to have toothpaste and be able to clean their teeth. And so the idea I had was, well, what if one created a product that is used by everybody at least once a day? And so I still haven't found that product. I think Instagram may be a product like that, or Facebook may be a product like that. But I'm sure there's lots of consumer products that can be made around. The original idea was, oh, why are people using this little twig to clean their teeth? And then it developed over time into, wouldn't it be great if one can think of a particular product that can be used by millions of, or in India's case, billions of people. So that's an example of something that I saw as a child and have thought about very often about, okay, well, people talk about scale. You can't get any bigger than 1 billion people in a country, right? So if you had a product like that, unfortunately, a lot of products that are used by everybody daily are of addictive nature, like so cigarettes, more recently vaping products, which obviously are coming under a lot of bad press over the last few weeks, or it could be alcohol, but I'm sure there's good products as well. Just before the session started, Fabio and I, we'd been in interviews all day and we were very hungry, and so we were having cookies over there, knowing that cookies aren't the most nutrient-rich kind of, but that's a product. So, for instance, can we not create snack foods that are very high in fiber and low in sugar and very good protein content as well? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, people who go to the gym will regularly have protein bars, but I had a protein bar as well after that. I'm training for a marathon right now, so my calorie intake has gone up a lot, but those protein bars taste very horrible. So, can one not create a product that
tastes like a cookie, but is a
exactly.
protein bar. Yeah.
That's right. So just like adults feel like having a snack during the day, children, I'm sure children everywhere in the world are attracted to sugar, right? So why can't you have healthy snacks for children? A child is going to eat it whether he or she is in school or coming back from school, or after they play in the playground, they're hungry and want to eat. So point is that there's lots of opportunity anywhere for you to think about products that actually can improve people's lives and in a healthy way as well, and do good for society and the economy, and as well make some profit for you as a business.
So this was you as a kid, lessons learned there.
Sure.
What were the main lessons from your first, second, and third startup?
Sure. I think the first startup was I'll tell you what the 3 startups were. The first startup was a fintech business in India I started, which was to help the large Indian middle-class population buy different financial products and buy a house and get a mortgage and get life insurance and car insurance, home insurance, file their tax returns. The second startup, which was more successful of all the 3, which is currently running right now, is a digital real estate services company in India called PropTiger. We've raised about $100 million now from a variety of different equity investors and some debt from Accel Partners and SoftBank. And News Corp bought a very large stake in our business, valuing the business at about $350 million. Those are all vanity metrics. So one of the things I've learned is, don't worry about vanity metrics unless the business is really doing well. None of those things mean anything. And the third business was, I've always been interested in the business of sports. And so after I failed with trying to start a Formula One racing team when I was at Harvard Business School in 2002, I started a sports marketing agency in India just to work with large enterprise companies in India. So there are some learnings that are just very common to all 3, and some that are somewhat unique to
specific to industry.
Specific to industry. So
what are the common ones?
The common ones are ultimately the business needs to make economic sense. Your unit economics need to work. You need to have revenues that are higher than your costs, because if they're not, then nobody's going to fund you infinitely. We're seeing that play out in a dramatic fashion right now with the WeWork IPO having been pulled. I know you're recording this, so I'll just state that we're meeting on the 2nd of October just so that in case somebody's watching this 1 year from now, they're wondering what they're talking about. So, in the last month or so, WeWork has come under a lot of press, as have a lot of other companies where their unit economics haven't been sufficiently robust. So we learned the lesson in my first business, which was called iTrust Financial Advisors. Like I said, India is not a particularly rich country, and we were trying to sell financial product to them, but there's not a lot of margin in financial product, right? If you're selling a mutual fund, you're probably getting a 1 to 2% entry load. If you're selling them a house, they're not buying a house worth $1 million. They're buying a house worth, then 10 years ago, it was more like 30,000 euros. And the margins on that are very low, just given the conversion rate that you have. And the service that we had was a very, very high-touch service. So we had very high costs on all the staff that we had recruited. We had about over 250 people at one point in time. So we were one of the largest financial advisory companies in India. We had automated everything. And the business was very successful, and we successfully sold it. But part of the reason we sold it also was related to a second learning, that if you're in a business that is regulated, and financial services in many countries, certain types of activities are, we were managing investment funds for our clients. We were an insurance broker, so we needed a insurance brokerage license as well. If you're in a regulated industry, then small companies often don't have the same capacity to engage and negotiate with the regulator. I say negotiate not because they'll do special favors, because you're a good negotiator, but very often, in emerging markets at least, the negotiators have a lot of power and control over small companies. And small companies don't have the resources or don't have the ability to pay law firms and lawyers lots of money to be able to go lobby on our behalf to the regulator or engage with the regulator to look at our application as favorably as they would look at the application for another large company. So the learning over there was, be careful about being in regulated businesses. Sometimes if you're a regulated monopoly, it can be a competitive advantage for you as well if the regulator hasn't given too many licenses out, like in the telecom business, right? Every part of the world, the telecom industry, there were a limited number of licenses given out by the telecom regulator. As a result, you've had very large companies in India and Latin America and the US, because only selected number of licenses were given out. But in our instance, the barrier to entry to becoming an insurance broker was very, very low if you met certain criteria, but the regulator exercised a lot of influence on it. So the learning was stay away from regulated businesses. And we use that learning to also develop the next business. So PropTiger actually grew out of the learnings from iTrust. We realized we were making the mistake of, I don't know what the average age in Estonia is. Anyone in the audience, what's the average age of the population in Estonia? Is it like late 20s, early 30s? India 10 years ago was 26 or 27, right? And so we were trying to sell insurance product to an average Indian customer who was 27 years old, where the payoff was going to be 30 or 40 years later. So people want instant gratification. People don't want a product where the payoff is going to be 30 years later. So we realized that we should focus on something that the customers want. So the big learning is, don't try and sell customers something just because academic textbooks or your financial theory says that, oh, everybody should be insured, right? Even though everybody who has financial responsibilities and, let's say, a family or a mortgage or a wife or a husband or children or parents to take care of, and they're dependent upon your income. If your income goes away, their lifestyle suffers. Logically, it makes sense, but people don't behave logically. They often react based on emotions and other things. And one of the emotions driving them is that they want instant gratification. So we realized that was a mistake in our business model to sell a young 27-year-old person, customer, a financial product that they will only get the benefit of 30 years later. So we realized that India is a young country. People want to own homes. And so we decided that based on all the learnings, we will start becoming a digital real estate services play and sell starter homes to young Indians who have mortgages available to them as well. There was a big IT service boom happening. and so a lot of people wanted to buy homes, and mortgages were easily available. Hopefully, that's a similar dynamic that's happened in other emerging countries like in the Baltic region as well over the last maybe 20 years. And so the learning over there is, if you can participate in a tide that's working in your favor, then swim with the tide as opposed to against the tide. In the previous business, iTrust, we were somewhat swimming against the tide because people didn't want insurance product. Believe it or not, people in India buy insurance as a tax planning product. Every year they get 100,000 rupees, which is, call it, €1,500 of allowance to use for tax planning. Many people would just buy an insurance policy from that because they'd get a tax saving of €1,500. But then, 10 years later, they've got 12 or 13 different insurance policies, and none of their insurance coverages cumulatively protect them or their family or their house. So the tide that we were swimming against over there was that people didn't want insurance for insurance purposes. People wanted insurance because it was like financial engineering for tax purposes. So that was the learning over there. And then I'll quickly talk about a generic learning from the third business, which was Formula One is a business sponsorship-driven sport, right? Many people joke and talk about these are basically billboards on wheels that are traveling at 250 miles per hour, right?
Before you go there, why did you have the idea of doing a Formula One team anyway?
Sure. I was always interested in the business of sports, and I was always interested in how brands get created. And as a child, we didn't have 24/7 cable television. It was probably what Estonia was like 30 years ago as well. So the only sports events that you would get to see would be the Wimbledon final or like the World Cup semifinal onwards, and you'd see all these hoardings of different companies over there, and it would fascinate me how these brands are developing their identity and loyalty and engagement with their customers or target audience through that. And I'd see the Coca-Cola logo under the umpire's chair in Wimbledon, and I'd see the Slazenger, a feline cat or leopard, whatever the animal is, on the green awnings of Wimbledon, and I'd say, oh, this is really interesting. You could make brands out of this. So when I started business school, actually before I started business school, I decided that I'm going to focus most of my 2 years at Harvard Business School trying to start a Formula One racing team. So even before I reached business school, I moved to Italy to learn Italian because I thought, well, maybe Ferrari will give me a job if I can speak Italian. I was very wrong because they didn't even return my phone calls. And then I spent a lot of time writing to all the different teams saying, look, I can help you with commercialization of your R&D. So Formula One is a business, right? The race happens only for 2 hours on a Sunday, but all the other time, it is actually a business. There are some very large brands associated with Formula One all across the world. A lot of technology companies work there. So, Microsoft has been there, Intel has been there, HP has been there, and numerous other companies from all across the world who've used it to associate the qualities of Formula One as a very high-tech sport so that can rub off on their brands and in the minds of their target audience. So I teamed up with a professor who was a leading professor in the technology space and commercialization of technology, and I convinced them that we can work with some of these teams to help these teams commercialize their R&D. There's a lot of technology from Formula One that comes from the racetrack onto regular commuter cars. And so that was the idea that, okay, I'll build a business around that. Unfortunately, after the horrible events of 9/11, the world entered a recession, all the sponsorship dried up, and a variety of other adverse events happened. There were some rule changes in the sport. Again, it's not a regulated sport, but rules can certainly affect you. And so I didn't get a lot of traction with some of the different teams, and they stopped engaging as much. So I ended up just writing a case study on Formula One, and now I just bug Fabio, my colleague, who's Italian, with my horrible Italian that I speak to him every once in a while. But the reason to start the team was because I thought, okay, let's do something really ambitious and see if one can run this like a business as opposed to petrol heads putting together a car on a weekend and not fully realizing the economic potential of, but it was a non-starter. It was, as I joked, that it was like a car crash for me, and that dream died. But the learning from running the Formula One marketing business in India was, we were pitching to some very large multinational companies in India for sponsorship, and that's when I learned that the sales cycle, when you're pitching to a very large telecom business or a large bank, can be as long as 1 year before they actually start paying attention to you. So I know some of you in the audience we met earlier today, and we may have even talked about the sales cycle with a bank, and that's what I learned the hard way, that your model and your spreadsheet may say, oh, in Q1 I'll close 2 leads, in Q2 I'll close another 3 leads, and I'll get more referrals and I'll close more leads. The world doesn't work that way. It's the other person needs to be on the other side of the table, probably has a lot of career risk. They're not an entrepreneur. If they're working for a large telecom company or a bank, they're not going to suddenly work and write you a $5 million check for sponsorship unless it pleases the CEO. So nobody's going to take career risk, and things just move at a very, very slow pace. So the learning for me over there was that enterprise sales can take a lot of time. Once you crack it, it can be very, very successful, but it just takes a lot of time for that. So those are examples of some of the generic learnings across that apply even today. And then some of the specific learnings, we'll be here till Christmas if we start talking about every mistake I made and everything I learned. But it's everything from hiring the wrong people, not getting rid of the people at the right time, when they had...
Let's stop there. It was one of the questions that regarding the teams that, first of all, how do... let me see, where was the team? Teams was here. How to find the right people, like to sales or tech, and how do I know that this guy is like unperforming, or should I give him more time or not?
Sure.
And how to make this decision of getting rid of unperforming employee.
So I had 2 questions over there. One was how to find the right people, and then the question around if things aren't working out, how to identify things aren't working out, and how to politely basically show the door to somebody. So I got very lucky. I teamed up with my classmate from business school for 2 of my startups, and the third one I was doing on the side. I had enough trust in the eyes of my business partner and co-founder that he gave me enough time to do that. So, a lot of it relates to running into somebody who has complementary set of skills to what you do. If you and your co-founder have the same skills, then you're 2 people too many, or 1 person too many rather, because 2 people are duplicating the same skill set. So, if you're the commercial person, then find the tech person. So my co-founder was more of an operations person. He had been an entrepreneur in the past. I was a first-time entrepreneur, so there was a lot of learnings that he had from building businesses in the past. And he had worked for GE. He was the CEO of a bunch of GE's businesses in India. So he came with a very P&L mindset. And I was more on the finance side. I was more on the marketing, branding, and business development side. And then we hired a team of people around us. But like a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, we made a lot of mistakes as well. Many of them have to do with not doing enough diligence on somebody when you're hiring somebody. As an entrepreneur, you're often very insecure about, oh, I better hire her or I better hire him quickly because they've got job offers from other people, and if I don't make an offer to them, they'll go away. If you don't feel fully confident that this is the right person for you, most importantly, they're a cultural fit and that they will not dilute what you've already built within the organization.
How do you test the culture fit?
Again, just spending more time with people. Don't just interview somebody for a half hour and then basically say thumbs up or thumbs down. I think you need to spend a little bit more time on them. You need to engage with some of the references that they have obviously shared with you, but they will clearly be biased and give you names of people who will speak very favorably of the candidate. But if a referee is actually neutral about that person, then if that's the best reference you can get, then that clearly is an indication of the person's skills and potentially their cultural fit as well, because if they didn't work out at one place, there could be some idiosyncratic reasons for that, but often it has to do because they may be not a person who fits in well into either a team environment. But the cultural fit is have that candidate meet more than a few different team members of yours. You know, you may have one set of data points having spent an hour or 2 hours with a candidate. You may be in a bad mood that day. You may be having a headache that day. You may be biased in certain ways. You may not like the kind of education the person's had, or you may be running late in traffic. So you may have a bias against that person. So have other people also meet the person, have some sense of the types of organizations they've worked at in the past. If they've worked at organizations where the culture is very different from yours. So if you're bringing, cultural fit can mean a variety of things. If you're bringing a candidate who's worked only for a very large company, right, which has existed for 20 years, 30 years, and you're bringing them into a wonderful space like this in a startup environment where they're going to be employee number 10, but they have the expectation of they'll have a photocopying machine, and they'll have free coffee, and they'll have somebody at reception opening and closing doors, and somebody who'll book the conference room for them, and somebody who'll book their flights and hotels when they have to travel, and there'll be a company credit card. And so often it has to do with the expectations that somebody is coming in with, and they may not fit into the entrepreneurial culture that you have in your 10-person organization. And then finally, I'd say, if you spend enough time with them, they will also let their guard down, right? A lot of people, when they go for interviews, including you and I, are putting on our game face. We're trying to look the best in front of, you know, the person who's interviewing us. But over time, you know, as the interview progresses, have a few questions that try and expose or give the opportunity for that person to expose their vulnerability. If everything is on top, everything is going really well, and nothing's been bad, and everything, you know that this person's probably exaggerating and is not a realist and not pragmatic or not very practical. So you can ask certain questions to really get an understanding of whether this person is suited to the organizational culture, whether this is the kind of person who you'd want to have as among your first 10 employees, who will set the culture for the rest of the 90 employees among the first 100 employees.
How do you balance that if you do like 10 interviews, like all your teammates can have an interview, that it's going to be a very long process, and also for a candidate it's very time consuming. But how many interviews in your practice is like optimal? But
yeah, so look, there's no formula for it, and a lot of the interviews that I did for the startups that I was doing in India had the Indian cultural context to it, right? So there are some people culturally in India, it's not uncommon for people to exaggerate stuff on their resume. They're not lying necessarily, right? But they're exaggerating stuff. You're talking about, oh, I built this product, and then you scratch a little bit deeper into the service, and you were like one of 20 people on a team who built it, right? So I think what you have to, so in this particular type of instance, you ask them, okay, what is it that you did? You know, if it's a technical person you're recruiting, then you'll bring in your technical person and say, okay, what code did you write? Or is it available somewhere, you know, GitHub or something like that, so you can review that code, or you can talk to them about how they thought about the product. Or if they were a product manager, you talk to them about, okay, what features did you put in, and what kind of KPI metrics were you tracking on a day-to-day basis? So I think if it's a very senior position you're bringing somebody on at a C level, or you know, if it's people who you're bringing on among your first 20 team members, I don't think there's any way out other than to spend a lot more time with them. Because if you have wrong DNA coming into the organization, then you've got to deal with, oh hell, I made a mistake. Then you've got to let go of the person. Then if you've given them ESOPs, there's all sorts of issues with accounting.
Has that happened to you?
It's happened a few times, and sometimes more than a few times, but not where it's gotten messy, where we've given ESOPs. But also keep in mind that the context when I was doing this in India, and there are some geographies, ecosystems where this is still very common, there are a lot of jobs available for people. So there are revolving doors where people stick in a job for 6 months or 12 months, they get a higher salary somewhere else and they're moving. So that would be happening all the time. Or sometimes we would be initiating this, where we would say, things aren't working out, you're not very productive, you're not fitting in, you're not hitting all the expectations that we have from a team member who has a lot of responsibility, you're not inspiring your team, you're not delivering the product on time. And the big learning for that, which hopefully you can use as well, is that by the time you've actually identified that problem to exist, it's already maybe a month or 2 months late. So it's not as if you can delay it even more. If you've noticed the problem, then the problem's probably existed for at least a few weeks, if not a month or two prior to that. So the sooner you do it, the better it is. I'm not advocating that you cut people off immediately. A big fan of giving people time to improve and develop, which is why regular interaction with people is very important, to take check of how the engagement's working, give feedback to people, be very transparent. And if you're a co-founder or a C-level person, then I think it certainly helps if you set your working style with your team members about how you work, how transparent you're going to be, if what you say is what you mean. Some people say, oh, work is really good, and then 2 weeks later you get fired. That's not a particularly transparent or nice way of working. But if after the first week you sit down with a new team member who's joined and give her or him some feedback saying, look, I really like that you focus on these things. Here's a few things we do differently over here, or here's a few things that I'm trying to do differently over here. Here are the reasons for it, and I'd love if you could potentially work on this. Then it can be very collaborative as well. And you can help that person also influence the culture and give that person enough ownership. You're not micromanaging them, but you're giving that person some direction of, here's how we need to move. The challenge that often happens in startups is that as you grow very quickly, and if you're successful in raising money, then you've got a lot of investor pressure to raise a lot of, once you've raised funds, you've got a lot of investor pressure to hire a team, because often your early rounds of funding will be, to develop the product, which means a lot of developers, product people, salespeople, if you have that. And then when you start hiring people that quickly, your standards can sometimes drop, right? The quality can sometimes drop. I'm not talking about a large tech company, like a US-sized tech company where they are hiring 100 people virtually every day. Then you've got an army of people, ops people, human resource people, people in talent acquisition whose job is basically to do that. But I'm talking about a company that's got maybe 10, 12 people, they've just raised 2 million euros in funding, and now suddenly they need to expand because they need to hit their targets over the next 12, 18, 24 months before the next funding comes. If you compromise on hiring today, then that bad decision will catch up with you, because 3 months or 6 months later you'll realize you made the wrong hire, and then you've got to get rid of that person. Then you've got to tell the board why you're getting rid of the person. Then the board may get worried about, do these guys know how to hire or not? Why are they getting rid of people? Is this attrition? Is something wrong in the company? So while I understand you said, oh, not every company has the luxury of doing 10 meetings, but you will make mistakes, but you've got to learn from them. And if you're not good at interviewing, then get somebody else who's good at interviewing. Who's good at reading people. I always like to understand what people's motivations are, what people's incentives are. Why are they doing this? Are they doing this to get rich quickly, or are they doing this because they really believe in the product and believe they want to do something entrepreneurial? In many ecosystems, it becomes very trendy to become a part of a startup, right? Suddenly a tech company comes, hires you, gives you a top salary and say, I'll leave my job at a consulting firm or a bank or a law firm. Sometimes those people work out, but at other times, you end up with, not a happy result, because many of these people are tourists, so just coming in and working in a sector, and they go away when things just go bad. But you want somebody who's really going to stick with you and is very, very passionate about the business that you're building and believes in your vision and contributes to your vision as well. And then when you have to get rid of them, I think you just need to have a transparent conversation with them around why things aren't working, how you gave them a development plan or an improvement plan or some feedback and they still haven't improved. And then finally, make it easy for them. Don't make it embarrassing for them. don't make a big deal out of it in the company, unless you want to set an example where somebody is leaving because of theft, or it could be sexual harassment, or it could be putting the brand name of the company into disrepute or getting you into a lot of trouble. That's a different kind of thing. And I'm not advocating or suggesting you have a lawsuit or case against them, but usually it can be quite emotionally draining for the entrepreneur as well as the person who you're asking to leave to have that conversation, right? When you're building a business, you're not building the business with the intention of laying people off or firing people. But when you've got to let people go, it can be very, very emotionally draining people. That person.
So how to do it with dignity? That I'm have to let you go because you don't perform. But how to do it with dignity?
Sure. So I think the first thing is you've got to keep it very private, right? So if you're in an open plan office, like many co-working spaces are, don't do it in the public cafeteria area, right? Where you basically say, "Oh, thanks very much, but things aren't working out," and there are 5 other people over there. So I think a dignified way of doing this is going into a conference room and having a conversation and basically talking about, look, here's how things have worked out, and this is not the way either you or us expected for things to work out. Sometimes the employee may already be aware of it, right? And you may just make it easy for them by saying, look, I think you may want to consider pursuing something else. This is not an area that is of interest to you, or maybe startups is not an area where you've cut out to be you're much more effective. And you've got to say a few positive things to them as well, right? So as an example, you can just say something like, I think your way of thinking is better suited to a more structured organization that has different departments, and organization structure is such that you will fit in a lot better rather than an organization where you've got to create all this. So I think you've got to try and make the other person continue to feel good about themselves. Clearly, the person, once they realize that, okay, I'm being asked to leave, that message is going to drop very aggressively internally. And some people may react very aggressively. Some people may react very, very emotionally or start breaking down. Some people may have a lot of financial issues to deal with. These are human beings you're dealing with, ultimately. And hopefully, in most cases, you still want them to be an ambassador for your firm. Things didn't work out, but this is a great place to work. I'd love to recommend any friend who comes over there. And so how you get rid of people, it's like, if you're dating somebody, you can do it in a very bad way, or you can do it in a very good way, right? And you can do it in a good way by making the other person feel still very comfortable. Yes, it's going to hurt, but hopefully the other person will still respect you. And so that's a few different tactical ways of doing it in a very dignified manner.
So one thing you're saying that in order to avoid failure, hire the right people and take your time to hire the right people and take your time to onboard them, that they know how they are measured. You measure it like weekly, you have a chat, you have a feedback.
Sure.
And if you notice something, act immediately, because the problem has been there already
for a few weeks.
For few weeks or a month, and offer like a recovery plan or improvement plan. It has to be fast. If this doesn't work, then find a dignified way how to leave in different ways. So
what I said in 10 minutes, he has said very articulately and nicely in less than 1 minute. So, yes.
Thank you. But one thing I heard was that taking in the people, like right people, that the people asked about how to hire the right AI team or like technical team or sales team. Yeah. So your first guidance is that hire into the right culture, that people who fit into your culture, and you can understand it if you talk to people several times and communicate with them. But how do you keep the people understanding and sharing the same vision as you work on? That yes, you can take them because you feel that they share the same vision, but your vision might change. Like startup is evolving animal, so how to keep everybody on the same page, especially when you are going from like 10 people to like 20 or 50 after raising your 1 or 2 million.
Yeah. So, look, you may have a very ambitious vision from day 0 of your startup, That vision will evolve over time based on market reality, your experience with customers, your experience with the real world out there. But generally speaking, that vision, will be there. So Google's vision, to basically make available the world's knowledge available to everyone very simply, has still stayed the same. A variety of other businesses have happened around, but the core business is still the search business. There are other companies that still have stayed true to their original vision. Some have pivoted, some have adapted based on market reality. But at an early stage, if you're changing your vision every 3 months or changing your roadmap every 3-4 weeks, it'll be very confusing for the employees. One day they're told to do this, the second week they're told to do something else, end of the month they're told the plan is something else. Once people have committed certain resources and time and their mental and physical energy to something, you want to go after it, and so that's why it needs to be well thought out. But what also needs to happen is you need to communicate what that vision is to people. And when you're a small team of 10 or 20 people, or say if we were in a startup and all of us were working together, we can easily get together over cookies or coffee or pizza and have a very open, transparent town hall type meeting once a month where you could be asking, the CEO questions around, hey, how are you thinking about this? Last week you said this. Has there been any change in thinking? How's the board thinking about this? How are our other investors thinking about this? Here's what our competition's doing. Do you think we're going to change our tactics or strategy in a certain way? And then talk about the vision as well, right? Are we still aligned in terms of what we're trying to do? Are we still, we met some really interesting companies today. One of the companies has this vision of making financial services easily available to the bottom of the pyramid, right? So if suddenly they change that and they start serving high net worth clients and wealthy individuals, then clearly there's been a change in the vision, right? They're no longer helping people at the bottom of the pyramid. They're helping, people or middle or top of the pyramid. So you can certainly question and have an engagement with senior members of the founding team or the C-level team to engage with them and ask them. And it's important that there's a culture within the organization where the senior team members are very open with speaking to different members of the team, even if you're very junior or even if you joined a week ago, to communicate that vision. Because if you don't buy into that, then you won't buy into the roadmap of how to achieve that vision. And you won't buy into the entrepreneurial culture of, look, it's us against the world, it's us against the big companies, it's us against well-funded competitors, and we have to go out there and execute that. So communication is very important, but equally, clear communication is very important as well. The CEO shouldn't be confusing what the vision is. You shouldn't be doing this and this and this and this and that. I think you need to have a little bit of clarity so that the average employee can understand. And when I say average employee, I don't mean they're mediocre. I mean the typical employee should be able to understand that without a 1-hour classroom lesson on here's what the vision is. And sometimes companies do a very good job of communicating that. At other times, they don't. And there are some businesses where, you don't necessarily need to have a vision. So if I'm starting a steel mill, I can still be an entrepreneur. It may not be technology related, or it may be different kinds of technology that I'm using. I mean, my vision is what? I'm making steel on a very cheap basis, and I'm selling it. It's a commodity. If I'm opening a mining business, my vision is, okay, I'm going to create a copper mine or something like that. So it's not a similar vision the way, Amazon may have a vision of, we're the world superstore, or Google may have a vision of making knowledge so accessible, or Facebook may have a vision of we're connecting people. But you can still execute. But in that kind of a situation, let's say if I've opened a restaurant, my vision may be to have happy customers at lunchtime and at dinner time, but that's kind of very obvious, right? A lot of restaurants have that, so there's no path-breaking vision over there. But as an employee at the restaurant, if I'm a waiter over there, or if I'm somebody who's front of house, or somebody who's welcoming guests, I still need to give the guests the right kind of experience so that I'm delivering upon the promise of happy customers at the end of a meal. So it may not be a vision, but I need to buy into that culture of I'm going to behave properly with these guests, I'm going to be very hospitable to them, and I'll show them a good time, and it's all about customer service. So it's very easy to, I think, get falling into that trap of every company needs to have a vision and yes, you may need to have a purpose, but there are enough businesses out there that succeed very well without a vision.
During this, you already mentioned this pivoting, that going from one direction to the other. What's your rule of thumb? When does a startup founder know that now it's the time to pivot, or what should they look for, or understand that there are two camps of thinking? Like one camp saying that you have to be stubborn, that you have to push, and we have these and these examples where people have pushed very hard, nobody has believed them, and then finally it's a breakthrough. And the other camp says that you have one life. Don't waste it on stupid things, that find an easier way to solve a particular problem or help a particular customer or apply this technology somewhere else. So what's your take on it? When do I, as a founder, have to pivot?
So I don't have a rule of thumb per se, and maybe other people do, but I think at some point you've got to use common sense around. If you don't have product market fit, but there is an adjacent area where your product may be better suited, or an adjacent target market where it may be better suited, well, that's potentially a catalyst for you to, or a stimulus for you to pivot. Similarly, if you realize that with the opening up of a new market, there's a better opportunity for you rather than the legacy opportunity that you were pursuing, you may pivot from your old idea and pivot into a newer market or a newer demographic or a newer segment that you're selling. But pivoting can be pretty hard as well. It can be pretty emotionally draining as well, because you've suddenly convinced all the investors and all your staff members and yourself that you're going to focus on one particular idea, and then suddenly you change that over a period of time. And so you've got to, it's like taking a super tanker and moving it around. Now, obviously, startups are not super tankers. They're small, catamarans who are very nimble, that, or motorboats that you can navigate in a very efficient manner. But yet, to change direction, sometimes a lot of founders take that as an admission of, oh, we were doing something wrong. But if it's the right thing for your business, then it's the right thing for you to do. Sometimes you may get feedback and input from your board members or advisors, but usually you'll get, I think the best feedback that you can get is from your customers. If they're not buying what you're selling them, if it's a product or a service or something else, then I think you probably need to pivot or adapt or adjust to the market reality that's out there. And you'll get the signals from the market. If not, I think you'll get signals from qualified or experienced board members who can share their perspective with you to advise you on what you want to do. And yet, there'll be many entrepreneurs who are very stubborn about it and just decide to do business in a certain way. They may succeed, and sometimes luck plays a very important role as well. Sometimes your irrational competitor who's been just spending money wildly goes out of business and suddenly things improve, and so you don't need to pivot. Or sometimes you have somebody who is looking for exactly the product that you have, and so far you'd been unsuccessful, but now these guys have found you and you're the only one who can do this. And so even though your unit economics weren't working previously, but this company wants you, so they may acquire you, or they may sign a long-term agreement with you. And you can avoid pivoting, but usually I think somebody within the company itself, whether it's the board member or the customer or someone, will basically give you that stimulus to identify that, okay, this thing isn't working. Often it's got to do with product market fit.
So you told 3 lessons from your startups. We talked about how to prevent failure through hiring right people into your culture.
You're not guaranteed success if you hire the right
people. But it's one of prevention mechanisms for failure. And you mentioned also that the board is important, that having right people on the board who can tell you the truth, which you don't like to hear, is important. Are there any other suggestions how a startup could prevent failure or increase the likelihood that they are not failing and they are succeeding?
Well, luck clearly plays a very important role in life and in startups, and it's good to recognize the presence of luck and identify that, you know, some things happen not because you're a genius, but because you got lucky. When you start believing in your genius and you know, not really appreciating the role that luck played in your life, sometimes your genius cannot be repeated. And that's when you realize, oh, you take a bigger bet and a bigger bet and a bigger bet. And so, again, just to use a topical example right now of WeWork. WeWork has built a successful business, even though the IPO has not gone through. You know, they've gone from a company that was 0 10 years ago to still being worth 10 or 15 billion, whatever the valuation is. It's successful by any standards, you know, to create $10 billion of value. But I think there was a little bit of overconfidence that this model is going to succeed when the unit economics don't work. So I go back to that point of, you know, you asked about what are the things that you should be aware of so you can reduce your failure. I think the unit economics are very, very important. Business cycles can come and go. Funding cycles can come and go. VCs will have a flavor of the month, and VCs will come and go. But the reality of your business and the economics of your business are the harsh truth that you've got to face and experience every day. Sometimes people are willing to ignore unit economics. Sometimes VCs ignore it for a very long period of time. Sometimes the startup founder ignores it as well. They say, oh, we're just going to grow, grow, grow. Well, growth without positive value creation towards, you know, the business doesn't mean anything. Growth for growth's sake doesn't really help you. That's probably why some of the recent companies that have tried to IPO have suffered very badly, right? So a long way of saying that the growth has to make sense economically, and the unit economics need to make sense. Second way you can avoid failure is don't run out of money, right? A lot of companies fail because they run out of money, because they've spent their money on things that don't directly add value to the customer, or don't directly improve your sales, or don't directly bring down your costs at scale. So a lot of startup companies get into this dynamic of, oh, I've raised funding, and so what made them successful when they were really scrappy and using recycled furniture, now they suddenly go to some shop and buy new furniture because they're like, oh, I need the office to look good, and I'll design my office this way and that way. Keep in mind what made you successful as a hungry entrepreneur will continue to keep you successful if you stay hungry. And you know, if you start spending your money on fancy furniture in the office and lots of fancy free coffee and fancy free snacks and so on, then, you know, beyond a point, it's not improving the culture of the organization that much, but it's giving people a sense of entitlement. And 6 months later, if you're running out of money and you've got to take the coffee away and you've got to take the fancy cookies away, then people are saying, oh, what's happened? So use your money in a very wise manner so that you're using it towards hitting the milestones that you have. Equity financing can be very, very dilutive. So, I mean, I joke with my founder that every piece of furniture that we bought, and we only bought secondhand furniture or recycled furniture, was diluting us, right? Because that basically meant that I had to raise another 100 euros of capital because I've spent 100 euros on that chair. So if I could avoid that, then I'm deferring my funding by a little bit as well. But equally, there's a lot of startups that fail because they are overfunded. You know, the joke is a lot more startups die of indigestion than they do of starvation, right? Because you've got so much money, and that's been happening over the last 10 years when interest rates have been at historic lows, and people are looking for return through any way because the bond market is not giving you, or interest rates are very low, and at different points in time the equity market has done well or not done well, although we're in a very, very long bull market. But money has become so abundant that even young startups that don't have that much of a product or economics worked out are getting $100 million, $200 million because people want to deploy that kind of capital to work. If your unit economics don't make sense, when you've raised a 5 million round of capital, they're not going to make sense if you've raised $100 million because you're going to do even more stupid things. So you need to, every founder or every CEO needs to be good at capital allocation. Doesn't mean you're allocating capital like people like Warren Buffett are, but you certainly can learn from the things that they're doing. And then I think you avoid, final thing I'll say, is you avoid failure by avoiding doing stupid things, right? And let that sink in for a second. Everybody makes out startup founders that are very successful to be, geniuses or genii, or people who are like so visionary and they went out there and succeeded and did everything that nobody else could do. I mean, these are people like us. There are very few people who genuinely are genius-like, right? And maybe the Google founders are that, maybe Mark Zuckerberg is that, but hundreds of startup founders aren't like that, right? They're normal people like you and me, and I'm not being disrespectful to them, but many people succeed because they don't do stupid things, right? And if you don't fall into a trap, or if you don't do things that you're not supposed to do, then you succeed just through surviving. And that's human nature as well in many ways, right? If you don't take a lot of stupid risks, then don't cross the road when there's a lot of traffic coming through. You'll survive, and you'll get to the other side of the road healthy, safe, successfully. But if you're in a rush and you're trying to grow very quickly because your competition is growing and your competition is spending $10 million a year on advertising, and you need to do that as well because if you don't, then they'll get all the customers and so on. Well, maybe they'll run out of money as well. Maybe their economics aren't going to work. Maybe the investors are going to say, well, this was like sugar. You kept giving sugar to the customers and they kept taking it, but once you stopped, they're not taking anything that you're buying anymore. So if one avoids stupid things, I think you can survive a lot better. And this, Warren Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, has talked a lot about this. And I'd encourage everybody to read a lot of the business wisdom that he has shared over the last 30 years. But I think it's important for startups to avoid the stupid mistakes that can get very difficult to retrench out of. And an example of stupid mistake is, well, don't suddenly take on a fancy office and increase your rent by 50% just because you've now got funding, and so your fixed costs are going up a lot, right? Don't buy that fancy furniture, or don't start flying first class or business class because it's not any better for your business. If anything, you're going to burn a lot more capital. So those are some examples of things that people often start doing. But in summary, those are unit economics, the people spending money smartly, not running out of money, and not taking on too much money either because it can kill you. Those are some of the things that, and not making stupid mistakes. Yep.
Startup life is very stressful. What are your personal practices, how to stay positive and not to burn yourself out?
Sure. So I have very, some of my practices are kind of very mainstream, some of them aren't mainstream. So I read a lot and I find that very relaxing. And some people get surprised that I read close to 3-4 hours a day. So very often, Fabio will find me in the office reading stuff. But I find that a good distraction from the work that's going on. And as I've gotten a little bit older, I'm trying to read a lot more texts that have survived for 1,000 years or 1,500 years or 2,000 years, because so much truth about human life has stayed true for 2,000-3,000 years. So when I flew in over here, we were in Helsinki yesterday and Tallinn today. I carried the Iliad with me. The Iliad was written, almost 2,000 years ago or thereabouts. And it's got so many truths about human life that you realize that the problems that you're going through today, Achilles was going through 2,000 years ago, and it's the same. So reading certainly helps me a lot, particularly texts that have been around for a while. I've been meditating off and on for the last 10, 12 years, but I can't say that it's really made visible improvements in my daily life, but I like to do it more out of discipline rather than measuring that, oh, this is much better for me, or I'm much more calm, or I'm much more relaxed, or I'm much more centered. So it's less about that, but more about, okay, I'm doing my ritual on a routine on an everyday basis. And so the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I meditate for about 21 minutes. I took long distance running up. I was always a runner, but more recently I've started running half marathons and marathons. So I do a marathon every year. So for at least 3-4 months of the year, I'm training for a marathon. And at my age, my bones and back and everything else hurts quite a lot. So, it distracts me from all the stresses of startup life, because I've got stresses of my back and neck and other things to worry about as well. But exercise is, I think, a very good antidote to the stress that you create in your life on a daily basis. All the positive energy that you get from that, the endorphins that on the blood supply, the adrenaline and so on can certainly help. And if you go talk to therapists as well, they'll talk about exercise, spending a lot of time in nature. And so my routines, I tend to spend a lot more of my time by myself in like my man cave reading or researching stuff. I find the intellectual stimulation about learning about new things to be quite therapeutic. So that's what I do. But I think generically speaking, people will tell you deal with the stress by doing something that is personal time for yourself, or spending time with your family or spouse or kids, or anything that makes you happy or takes you away from, oh, I'm going to run out of money at the end of the month and I don't have payroll. Yes, you should be stressed about that, but I think you can manage some of the stresses by being very balanced, and also keep in mind that you're not any better a person because you've built $1 billion business, or you're not any worse a person because your business has collapsed. You're exactly the same person who you were yesterday. And focus on daily improvement. And if you focus on getting better every day, then the compounding effect of that over 365 days in a year, you'll find that you're a better person, more skilled, and you've got a lot more value to add to things and to people around you. What a lot of people do when they get very stressed is they either start eating a lot of sugar, like cookies, or they start binge eating and start eating a lot of junk food, or they start doing things that are adding to their stress as well. So if you have people around you who care for you, who love you, and are involved in your success and have a vested interest in seeing you healthy and succeed as well, then I think a lot of those people can act as checks. So, whether it's Fabio or me, we've got a working relationship where if one of us is overworked or feeling a little bit stressed, our working relationship is such that one of us will tell the other, take time off, I got this, or you go to the gym, or you go for a run, or you do something else and we'll take care of it. So I think some of it has to come from your colleagues as well. And as a startup founder, while it's your personal reputation that may be on the line because you've raised money from investors based on who you are, not because of the 20 people, it's useful to keep in mind that you've got a team around you, and you've got to either devolve a lot of responsibility and authority to the team, and you're in this together as a team. Yes, it's your personal name as founder that may get affected, but if you've learned from it and done the right thing, people will still want to work with you, and you shouldn't feel stress about the risk of things going south or failing. I mean, it's like failure is pretty much the standard norm. Statistically, there's a lot more failure than there are successes in the startup world. So recognize that sometimes failure can happen for a lot of reasons that are out of your control. Like I said, regulations may change, or the economy may go into a recession, or yesterday on the flight, I was reading a story on this French fashion brand called Sonia Rykiel. Am I pronouncing it right? Or Rykiel, or right? After 60 years, it's gone into liquidation. And how does a 60-year-old brand that's been very successful go? Well, the second largest market for them was Russia, and so their partner in Russia shut 8 of their stores when the Russian crisis happened 3 years ago. So can you forecast that? No. And then suddenly 60 years of history just goes away down the drain. So some things you can take care of, some things you can't take care of, but recognize that you're still the same person who you were, whether you're successful or not. Sometimes people let success go into their head too much, or failure bring them down too much. And I think if you stay stable, it can certainly help you navigate the ups and downs of life. It's no different to what a sportsman does, right? Sometimes you stand and you're required to take a penalty and you score a goal, and sometimes you're hoping to win the World Cup or the European Champions League or European Champions something, you're required to take a penalty and you miss it. It doesn't make you any worse or better a footballer. It could be a variety of reasons that go in. So if you're stable about your emotions and managing your emotions, I think you'll probably be a lot more comfortable with yourself and what life throws at you, rather than get super excited and super depressed.
We are running quickly out of time, so it's been very interesting. Thank you very much so far. My final question is about Estonian startups, and there's been a bunch of them in Techstars, and you've been visiting Nordic countries and Estonia also, and visiting today, having office hours with a bunch of Estonian startups. So as an outsider, do you see any difference from like startups coming from Estonia or Estonian founders? Do we have some advantages, and can we build on them our next successes?
Sure, absolutely. So I think both Fabio and I were very keen to come to Estonia because our fintech program hadn't been including Estonia or Tallinn in our roadshow, and we wanted to change that. Clearly in the fintech space, there's been a lot of recent successes. And in the entrepreneurial space, of course, everybody talks about Skype and Bolt and recently TransferWise. So we wanted to make sure that we are here and giving the right kind of attention and resources to all the Estonian entrepreneurs that we can meet. But you're asking about the perspective and, our Estonian entrepreneurs need different or not. I think the country is blessed with such good engineering talent and such an entrepreneurial mindset out of the recent history over the last 30 years. The policies that different governments have enacted to make this the most digitally advanced society and economy in the world are, I think, certainly envious of a lot of people are envious about that, and that can only help, right? The world going forward is not going to be analog; it's going to be a lot more digital, and to some extent, when you're only 1.5 million people, it's much easier to run these activities, right? If India was to do something with 1.5 million people, that would be an experiment. That wouldn't be whereas in your case, it's just very easy to lay it out there. So I think there are some natural advantages that Estonia has, some of which are historical, some of which are the result of good policies over the last few decades and generations. You've got a very well-educated, technically educated young population. It's a great pool of talent, which is why a company like Twitter also opens a dev center here in Northern Europe. You've got lots of different markets around where competition for talent is important, and lots of good technology companies, whether it's a Finnish gaming company, or it's a Swedish gaming company, or a payments company that is able to, cross-pollinate through all the talent that you have over here. And 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you could say that Estonia or the Baltics or Eastern Europe, there were a lot of feeder markets for talent where you would just contract your work out to a development team in Estonia, but now it's changing. There's lots of world-class startups that are coming out of here. The ecosystem is growing because of wonderful members of the ecosystem like you and members of the audience over here. The great facilities that exist in this kind of a complex over here. The conferences like Latitude that happen. So all these things are certainly feeding in a very, very positive way and making a very virtuous cycle of improving things from a base which is already quite high because you're blessed with a very talented population right now. So all these things going forward will only, I think, add to the strength of the successes that come out of a country like Estonia. So we're very excited to be here, and we were very happy to spend our day here meeting with 14 different companies, and we hope that, like our other programs across the world, our fintech program can also maybe recruit at least one company from Estonia in this cycle, if not next year. And we'd love to come back and spend a lot more time and tell people a lot more about Techstars and how we can work together, but also share our feedback on your businesses, and if we or our network can help you in any way, even if you're not interested in any of the products or accelerators that Techstars has, then we're happy to be good citizens in the entrepreneurial community to help you with issues that you're dealing with and offer you some mentorship and office hours. So we're super excited.
So I'm really sorry that we didn't book like 3 hours or something like this, but our time is up. Thank you very much, Kartik, for coming and sharing your wisdom and insights. At least I got a few good tips for Superangel startups, and as we are going to have a dinner, I'm going to ask all these other questions I have here. So it's going to be a long dinner. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So thank you for coming, and see you around next time. And happy hunting for your becoming a next unicorn.